I'm born and raised in Peshawar, and at one point Peshawar was the most dangerous city in the world. It's hard to draw a line exactly who Taliban are. My own brother, he was a survivor of a suicide bomb blast. Imran Khan had a nickname, Taliban Khan. That's what their motives is. It's not to eliminate terrorism, it's to keep themselves happy. 3 weeks ago, there was a bomb blast in Bacha district. 150,000 Pashtuns were victims of terrorism. Why us? Why do we have to suffer in every wave of Talibanization? We are the one who are being affected on the forefronts. Hundreds of thousands of people out on the roads bearing white flags, written, literal peace written on those flags.
In this episode, we have our good friend Sawal coming back on the podcast. We talked a little bit about his experience with the Taliban in the first episode with him, but with the resurgence of what's going on in Pakistan, we had him back on.
If I wanted to add to that.
Yeah. All right, cool.
The Inspire Us podcast.
We talked a little bit about, the Taliban, you grew up, and then you were telling me that it kind of slowed down and it became peaceful, but recently there has been some resurgence of Taliban. So what kind of happened?
So over the past 1 month, the TTP, or Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, basically Taliban's Pakistani wing, they have been more active. About 3 weeks ago, there was a bomb blast in Bacha district, which is on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and an ex-senator was targeted. He was killed, unfortunately, and alongside 3 or 4 of his friends were also killed in that bomb blast.
Who was targeted?
Hidayatullah. He was an ex-senator.
Oh.
And so what they do is they start targeting people who speak against Taliban, and it just sort of aggregates from that, and that's what we saw in the first wave and the multiple waves that we experienced. So that's how they're regrouping again, sending threats to people, asking ransom money, stuff like that. And then following another week, there was another bomb blast in Mardan, which is not on the border, which is somewhat interior, but again, it's in the northwest region in Pashtun. And then just a week after that, Gilaman Pashtun, who was an anti-war poet, he was murdered in Islamabad, stabbed multiple times. And following that, there was a huge sort of resentment against not only the state of Pakistan, but also the establishment. And there was a huge peace march in Banu district, again in Pashtunkhwa. So one thing we have to keep in mind is that most of these bomb blasts or target killing, they're happening across Pashtunkhwa or the KPK province, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province.
And that's in the north of Pakistan.
Northwest, bordering Afghanistan. And that is why Pashtun rights movements such as PTM, which is Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, and other movements like that, they have sort of organized and really asking the state, why us? Why do we have to suffer in every wave of Talibanization or in every wave of terrorism? Why are we on the front?
Well, can you remind people what and who the Pashtun people are?
Yes, so the Pashtuns are divided between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The northwest province, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, and southeast of Afghanistan. We're ethnically the same nation, but following the British colonialism and the artificial boundaries that the British Empire set, we were divided. And that translated into when India and Pakistan were created, they were permanently separated then. So yeah, that's a brief history. We speak Pashto. That's our common language. We have multiple dialects in Pashto, but one thing that unites us is that we are pretty much homogeneous in our culture. Of course, urbanization does have a huge impact on culture, and it's sort of urbanization always sort of integrates indigenous culture into capitalism, and of course, it does have some impacts on that. But apart from that, I would say that we're still tribal in our values, as we've always been. And yeah, that's a brief history or a brief description of Pashtuns.
And you mentioned that this terrorist activity is happening in the northwest of Pakistan.
Yes.
And this is also where most of the Pashtun population is.
Yes, this is where, yes.
And so is that a coincidence? Are the Pashtuns the one that are the terrorists? And why is this happening all in the same place?
So we have always been the target of terrorism since literally day one. And it's not a coincidence. So you see the way Pakistan is divided is that we have 4 provinces: Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan, Punjab, and Sindh. And most of these terrorist activities or terrorism is restricted to just Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. Because we're considered periphery provinces. Maybe that could be one reason. But the bigger reason is that since when the USSR was almost on the forefront of South Asia, it was this route that they were coming through Afghanistan and into Pakistan. And at that time, the Mujahideen or the Afghan Taliban, they were created. And that's when bloodshed began on our soil. And it's still going on, unfortunately.
So when this Afghani Taliban was created, then they started targeting you guys in Pakistan.
So initially what happened was they started fighting the Soviets. And then after that...
so was it born kind of as a defensive group saying we need to protect ourselves? So they created this
yes,
group?
But it was not protecting themselves. It was actually protecting the interests of America and restricting the USSR to Central Asia. Ziaul Haq, who was the chief of army staff at that time in Pakistan, he gathered a lot of money from the US and he basically trained Taliban, created Mujahideen to fight against the Soviet. Now those Talibans, they were mostly Pashtuns. And there could be a lot of reasons for that. But what happened was that they sort of developed these extremist Islamic values and thought that this is the only way for our survival. And that if the Russians come here to our land, they will essentially impose a ban on religion and we will lose our identity.
Around what time was this happening?
70s. 70s it started, that's, yes. And then from 79 till 89, there was this whole war going on. And then from 89, the USSR fell.
And was there like mass migration?
Yes, there was huge migration. In fact, Pakistan was hosting the largest number of refugees in the world just until I think 2008. And all of those were Afghan refugees who had to who had to flee the battleground. And it just didn't end there. I mean, once the USSR was gone, then the Taliban gained control of Afghanistan. They formed their own government. That's when the US realized that things are getting out of our hands. They came to the US, they came to Afghanistan, started a whole war essentially in Afghanistan, and then the migration just continued, internally displacing people, externally displacing people. And and throughout that time, somewhere in the middle, TTP or the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan was created, which essentially had the same motives of enacting an Islamic state, but in Pakistan. And they were also all Pashtuns. They were Pashtun-dominated militant organization. And what they did was they started military operations in the northwest province of Pakistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And initially they pierced through Waziristan and then also gained a lot of momentum and also gained ground and in Swat, Bunair, Dir, and other districts of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
Okay. But so I wanted to ask you, what role does Pakistan have to play in the creation of the Taliban? I was hearing about the inter-service intelligence, which is Pakistan's intelligence system, and how they actually funded a lot of training for Mohammed Omar, the supreme leader of the Taliban. So what role does Pakistan have to play?
So essentially, they were created from Pakistan and they were trained in Pakistan and then sent into Afghanistan. And ISI did all of that. As I mentioned earlier, Ziaul Haq, he was the chief of army staff at that time. And so the ISI is essentially the intelligence wing of army, Pakistan's army. And they sort of deal with all of these illicit operations that are going on, have been going on since day one. And they sort of have the leverage to keep everything under the hat. That's what they did. So if anyone's responsible, of course, it's just them. And later on, even the army admitted that, even the government admitted that yes, we had a big role in this.
In the creation of
Taliban, yeah.
Taliban within Pakistan. Because at first, they were just in Afghanistan.
So if there's this whole idea of madrasas, or the whole concept of madrasas. Madrasas is basically just a school. The literal translation of madrasa is a school. But those schools were teaching more of, like, for example, religious teachings, for example, Quran and stuff like that. And what happened was there was this soft nudging of students. Now, Talib literally means student. The literal translation of Talib is a student. Who in their right mind can imagine a student holding an AK-47 killing innocent people? But it was the soft nudging that was going on that sort of coerced them and sort of forced them into thinking that everything against Islamic values is like you're supposed to eliminate them.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, the Taliban, because people kind of associate them with this. They're just a continuation of the Mujahideen, but they're very different, I think, in their ideals and even the makeup of the group. Apparently, they're just these young boys who've just taken this wild interpretation of Islam and the Sharia law and have, exerted their control over the region. And it's just such a shame, just when you hear about the atrocities and some of the public executions they host. I mean, I guess, is there that fear in Pakistan that this could be the future?
Yes, especially in our province, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the fear is definitely rising. Since they're gaining more momentum, they're gaining more ground, this fear is definitely rising.
Is this just in the last month that this fear is rising, or in the last year?
So for the last few years, we were hearing they've been spotted in wherever at this time, but then it would slow down. But for the past month, it's been more consistent. Just today I read an article that the US is about to release a 101 million package for Pakistan to deal with terrorism. So these are a few indicators that we can tell that, all right, this game is actually gaining momentum now.
But some people say that the army supports the terrorism, that in some, underhanded way, they support it. So if the U.S. government is giving them money, isn't that just not going to solve the problem?
It's just going in the pockets, That's what their motives is. It's not to eliminate terrorism. It's to keep themselves happy, keep their pockets heavy, and just make some money.
And can you talk more about this? You're talking about these schools, Quranic schools, but in those schools, what was happening? You mentioned AK-47s. What was going on?
That's coming back to your question. That's how it started essentially. Just soft nudging that that if anything is against Islamic values, it's haram. You're supposed to eliminate that, and then slowly pushing people to be more extremist and aggressive and violent, and then translating that into training to fight against the Soviets. So that's essentially how it started. And as Tara mentioned earlier, yeah, they were young boys at one point, but I mean, now they're all.
I guess everyone grows up.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And you growing up, so you mentioned now that there were more sightings of Taliban. You growing up, were you having these sightings?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it was at one point it was pretty normal. At the peak of TTP, and between 2005 to 2008, yeah, it was pretty normal. It's hard to draw a line exactly who Taliban are, because the army is so much involved with them that half of them literally wear army's uniform in the day and then they're Taliban at the night. So that's how we can tell that they're supporting them.
So there's this ambiguity between the army and the Taliban, and it's kind of almost merged into one.
Yeah.
You can't make that distinction between.
Yeah, I mean, at one point it was like that. Right now, again, it's so hard to tell, because everything every operation of ISI, it's under the hat. The public never knows about it. No one knows if someone is part of the Taliban or ISI, and I mean, they've always kept them under their control. And the way they keep them under their control is by essentially making them a part of them.
But what interest could the army have in having a terrorist organization in their country?
So the US just is about to release $100 million. That's how they get money. The war on terror, we need money. We're going through bad economic phase. We need money to fight terrorism. Just give us some money. That's how it works.
And what you said that the main victims or the main target of the Taliban are the Pashtuns.
Yes.
Why is that, and what are they doing?
So, as I mentioned earlier, the way that Pakistan is divided into 4 provinces, Punjab always tries to keep itself safe. I mean, there was even a statement from the Prime Minister of Punjab, from Prime Minister of Pakistan, which said that we need to keep Punjab safe. There was an announcement of a military operation just about a month ago against Taliban and terrorist forces, and that operation is also being run just in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan. It's not being done in Punjab or other provinces. Just over the past 22 years, there were 17 military operations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which affected Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. This would be the 18th military operation. And since the advent of Pakistan, we've had 26 military operations in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. This would be the 27th in total. So,
when you say military operation, what are you referring to?
Full-on scale military operation where you send your forces in, you send intel, you gather intel, you send your forces in, you have battles on the front. Again, as I said, it's hard to draw a line exactly.
But is military operation against TTP?
Yeah, TTP and terrorist forces. So they also they basically justify their operation by not only including TTP as an enemy, but they also include the separatist movements in Balochistan, for example, BLA, Balochistan Liberation Army, or other separatist movements.
And what sort of collaboration do the TTP have and the Taliban in Afghanistan?
So they definitely share common values, common goals. The biggest, I would say, the biggest concern for the Pakistani government is that Afghani Taliban are sheltering TTP. And there was also an airstrike just, I think 3 weeks ago, which targeted the bordering areas of Afghanistan through Pakistan. And there was a lot of enragement from the Afghanistan Taliban too. It's basically compromising our sovereignty if you're doing airstrikes in another country. So they do definitely shelter them. They share common goals, and they're working more in harmony and synergy now.
Okay. And I've heard the border which is the Durand Line, is what they refer to it as. It's quite porous, so there's no hard border like I think India, Pakistan has.
Yeah.
Do you think the border being so, futile kind of exacerbates?
It was quite porous about till like 2.5 years ago, but there was essentially a, a barbed wire whole like fence completed just like 2 years ago. If they still have that same excuse that the border is porous, we can't defend it, and by they I mean the army, why can't you defend the border? I mean, you've literally created a fence now. Couldn't you defend the fence? The border is still, I would say, it still is porous. That's because it's like a mountainous region, and secondly, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, we're the same people. We're Pashtuns across the border too. Most of them have like family ties. Most of them have like businesses going on. So they still want a way to keep that running. But again, it's the responsibility of, I mean, that's the only responsibility of army to defend your border.
Yeah.
If they can't do that, then what good are they?
Is there this idea of Pashtun unity? I mean, Pashtun just being their own sovereign nation and just kind of diverging away from the other ethnic groups or whatever comprises of Afghanistan and Pakistan. What is that movement? Could you tell me more about it?
So this movement is referred to as Pashtunistan movement, or like this land of Pashtuns. What people who advocate for Pashtunistan, what we believe is that essentially we didn't go through a state building process or a nation building process. It is quite true that Pakistan is very multi-ethnic, but I mean, what I think it's multinational. We speak different languages, we have different culture, even like we even don't look very similar in some occasions. So it started as a reaction, that's what I personally think, reaction to Durand Line and then oppression of the mainstream Pakistani government on Pashtuns. That's what basically fueled this resentment against the Pakistani state, and it's still going on like that.
I really feel that when I talk to Pakistani people. What are you?
I'm Pashtun. Yeah.
Well, typically Pashtuns are very light-skinned, sometimes blue eyes.
Yeah.
And the other ethnic group is, what's the other majority?
So the majority of Pakistanis are by population, they're Punjabis.
Punjabis, okay.
Yeah, and then we also have Baloch, Saraiki, Sindhi, and then we have other small ethnicities in each of these provinces too. For example, we have Hazaras, and then we have, even for example, the north region, we have Gilgitis, Baltis, Chatralis. It's too diverse.
Is it right to say that perhaps the other regions, they sort of resent Pashtuni people? When I speak to other Pakistani people, it seems like there's a lot of harbored negative feelings toward Pashtun people.
Yes, unfortunately. And that's one reason why the Pashtuns would want to separate from them.
Yeah.
It's not like the Pashtuns consider themselves aliens, but it's that the mainstream media or the mainstream government considers them as aliens. It's pretty much the same way like any majority would treat a minority. The minority would, they would resent them. And especially in a case where we've had bloodshed for literally decades. I mean, more than 150,000 Pashtuns were victims of terrorism. It's not a small number. Of course, you would get some sort of reaction. And then other ethnicities, they would think, oh, this guy is a traitor to our country. And it's like when someone goes through so much trouble and so much hardships and you label them as traitors, how else would they react?
Yeah.
And would you say there's a growing movement in Pashtu nationalism? Are Pashtus becoming more, more nationalist, more separative towards Pakistan?
So the word, I mean, separatist movement, it's a bit in the gray, to be very honest. But Pashtun nationalism has certainly been growing, especially since 2018, when there was an extrajudicial killing of a Pashtun laborer in Karachi. As a result of that, the Pashtun Tahaffuz
Was that a
movement.
terrorist attack?
No, it was a targeted killing uh, uh, through the Pakistan's police, and they even admitted to that. So, and in reaction to that, there was a huge uprising of Pashtuns under the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement (PTM). That's the most recent nationalist wave in Pashtun nationalism. Apart from that, we have other nationalist parties, but they're more they engage in soft politics rather than active resistance against the state.
Is there a relevance between the growing Pashtun nationalist movement and the growing terrorism that we're seeing in that region?
So, Pashtun nationalist movements, which is PTM at the moment, they do resist Taliban's and the terrorist waves. So the more terrorism we see, the more protests we can see from their side, the more people are mobilized, the more people speak against it. So there does exist a causality. But the causality is, like, for example, terrorism causes Pashtun nationalism to grow or augment. That's how I understand it.
It's really a crazy thing because, here in the West or in the US, terrorism, or you hear the Taliban is such a known term, but yet it's so broad, so distant, so far away. And just, growing up with it, you seem for it to be so normal for you,
Yeah.
Seems like, it's just part of the thing. But it seems like you even have a different perspective on it. It almost seems like it's it's part of a, political party or whatever. Well, we have in the West such a, terrorists, just bombings and stuff like that, but it's like much more complex.
It is because there are a lot more actors involved, and the more longer it takes to grow, I mean, the more complexities it has. So it's just not a bunch of terrorists just bombing a few cities. I mean, there's a lot of history behind it.
But Sawal, from your understanding, how would you describe the ideology of the Taliban? What is the intent? What is the end goal? What is their plan? Because I think many people just, as Alex said, it's just in the West, it's these crazy terrorists that needs to be stopped. But what is their,
So the end goal is to establish Islamic system all through the world.
For the world. So,
but Taliban, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, I mean, they've just set the goal. They've just restricted their goal.
They just want Pakistan.
So, but then again, they've been through such circumstances that they are very extremist in their standards or criterias of what's Islamic and what's not Islamic. I mean, Islam in its true essence is a religion of peace and tolerance. But if you can't tolerate what you think isn't the right path, then I mean, what's even the point then? So it's just based on propagating hate and violence.
But I find it such a shame. How do they get it so wrong? How do they take Islam so out of context? And what were these schools teaching? Why did these? How did it become like this? Or do you think it was because of the civil war for so long? So there was a lot of animosity and hatred, and they just needed to exert that in any way possible.
And it seems so crazy that they're getting even more people now to this day.
That certainly does add to it, the extended period of war and just violence and terror. But again, it started from like this propaganda against the USSR. Oh, the USSR is coming. They'll take away your religion and they'll force you to be atheists and your identity will be lost. and then again, if you're sensitive about something, and you're constantly made to believe that they're coming for you, you would react. And then you couple that with dollars, lots of arms, ammunitions. You have no industries. You have no other economic incentives for people to engage in the society. Your society is already pretty much closed, doesn't interact with the world that well. What else would you do?
Yeah, no, I get it. It's just such a shame.
It is.
And the US's involvement in this clearly seems to be quite large. I mean, I think even there was a time when they wanted access into Pakistan because they wanted to find bin Laden, and they'd operate in Pakistan, and the IMF would give out loans, and Pakistan were receiving a lot of, support.
Yeah.
But you were saying it kind of just trickled down or stayed within the army, and none of the people were able to see any benefits from the funds the US gave.
No, benefits, we only saw war. We only saw blood. Those were the benefits of dollars.
And this brings me on to Imran Khan, because he was quite anti-Western, wasn't he, or anti-US? And what was his take on this, on the Taliban?
So when he started his politics, he was very anti-West or anti-imperialist forces. But then at one point he realized, and again, it's just my opinion, he realized that if I have to gain power, I have to be part of the establishment. That's what happened. Just under his tenure, his own party basically released and then signed bills and laws which illegalized anyone to literally even criticize army. And then the army used the same laws to literally get hold of all of his party members once they were done of him.
Wow.
So he changed his priorities, he changed his narrative just to be in power.
So he sold out, essentially.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's what happens.
What was his take on the Taliban and terrorism in his country?
So, funnily enough, Imran Khan had a nickname, Taliban Khan.
Taliban hand.
Yeah, he was very pro-Taliban, but pro-Taliban in the sense that he wanted to negotiate. And to some extent, that's understandable. If you've been in war for 4 decades, it's not like it's not going to end that soon. I get that, but it also doesn't mean that you legitimize them. Diplomacy is the way to go, but then again, that diplomacy also has to be very strategical.
But to me, Pakistan is so flip-flop on the Taliban. It's like 1 minute you don't want them, next minute let's fund them, next minute no Taliban, and it just flip-flops.
So you have to see them as a tool. When the army or ISI they're out of money, they would want something to basically legitimize their income.
Yeah.
So they're more of a tool. That's how I see them.
Yeah, because I also heard about, it was also a tool. It kind of acted as this counter. What's the word for it? It sort of just counteracts India as this sphere, and you just kind of cooperated because you're both, because of Islam, and you both didn't want India to have any, larger influence in that region. So you kind of just use this as a tool, and it just seems to me counterintuitive. Would any of the Pakistani people have reasons to like the Taliban?
Not any normal person, no. Anyone who's seen what the waves of terrorism were like, no.
So how are they recruiting more people?
So as far as I can understand, most of them are from Afghanistan now. Because they are sheltered in Afghanistan. So naturally, you would recruit local people. Secondly, again, as I said earlier, it's hard to draw a line where Taliban end and ISI begins. So definitely, they're also playing a part in it.
So is there this growing resentment or hatred towards Afghanistani people in Pakistan? Because I heard about, was it last year? that I can't remember who it was, but there was an order of about 1.7 million Afghanistanis you have in Pakistan to leave right away, otherwise you'll all be deported. So I must
Yes.
imagine there's some growing.
Yes, exactly. You've put it correctly. And the reason for that was to basically regulate the border and to keep more stricter track of who's coming in and who's going out. Of course, that didn't work. If you can't defend your borders again, what good are for you? What are you even doing?
And how has the Taliban impacted your life or your family's life?
So I'm born and raised in Peshawar, and at one point Peshawar was the most dangerous city in the world.
Oh wow, the world.
The world. We saw suicide bomb blasts every day, literally every day. And it sort of desensitized us, because every 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. when we used to turn on the TV to watch the news, we'd see a news like, there was a bomb blast, 10 people died, 13 people died, 50 people died. And it came to a point where these numbers, these people who were dying, they just became numbers. And we were desensitized to that to such a big extent. I'm just realizing that all of this, now. There were many times where I either just crossed one place and there was a bomb blast there, or I was going there and there was a bomb blast there. And it's been many times that, if I'm sitting right here, there's a huge, boom, and I hear the windows rattling. And then I realize that, there was a bomb blast just a kilometer away. My own brother, he was a survivor of a suicide bomb blast in Islamabad.
Wow.
Yeah.
Could you tell me more? What happened?
So he works for the UN, and he was working for WFP at that time, and there was a suicide bomb blast in the WFP's country office in Islamabad. And he was in there. Luckily, we're very grateful for that. He was safe. He only got minor injuries. And he was the one who basically identified the suicide bomber in that in that bomb.
How does he recall that experience?
So I haven't talked to him much about this, but he only remembers a few instances where he said that I was sitting in my office and then suddenly there was this huge blast and there was just smoke and debris all over, and you can't even hear anything. If there's such a big blast, your hearing stops working for a few minutes. Then once everything settled, he just tried to get out of there. He found a few of his colleagues over there who he just sort of just pushed out. And then he told me once that there were a few other of his colleagues who unfortunately couldn't make it. And it's always a tough experience.
Yeah, that must really, because you mentioned that you were desensitized from it, but I think maybe experiencing it just hits you really in the face.
Must be so traumatizing.
It does. Yeah, it is.
And did you ever come to any close calls, or you're walking and you see something?
So I would say maybe in a kilometer's distance. That was probably the closest I've been.
So
How big are these bomb blasts? Do they have the same bombs, the
no,
same technology?
they don't have the same caliber or same technology or same scale. Some are smaller, some are way bigger. Up to even 300 people have died in a single bomb blast.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where was that?
That was in my city, in Peshawar. Yeah.
So you had this fear. Well, you said you were desensitized to it all, but surely you just had this fear of every day.
Of course you do. You cannot go to mosques because mosques were being targeted. What? Yeah. And that's why I'm saying that, any sane person doesn't believe that the Taliban are even Islamic in any
mosques
sense.
were actually targeted
Yeah,
by bomb blasts?
most of the bomb blasts were carried out in mosques.
Well, how can someone explain the logic behind that?
I can't.
So sad.
You're asking the wrong person.
But what's the purpose behind that? Why would they?
So they would say
target?
that this tiny faction is un-Islamic because they're not doing exactly what we're doing. So they're un-Islamic.
Are they both Shia? I mean, sorry, Sunni?
But sometimes they were Sunni, sometimes they were Shia, sometimes they were like another small sect within Sunnis who would just like, maybe just pray a bit differently or like, have very minor differences. They're like, yeah, you're not Muslim enough, so I'm going to blow you up.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is the Taliban one entity or are they fragmented? 'Cause we
They
talked
are
about many-
fragmented. They are fragmented. They have multiple groups. So what happens? I mean, it's very similar to like warlords. So whoever gains more power, whoever has more men, whoever has more ammunition, they create their own group. Yeah, it's pretty fragmented.
So what about the group that is in control now of Afghanistan? Are they fragmented or is it just one powerful group?
So it's been a while since they're in power. And in the start, they were pretty fragmented to the point where they couldn't establish a government. There were changes in their government literally every other week. Now they have sort of stabilized to some extent. But TTP, on the other hand, I mean, it's still fragmented.
How did they come together?
Again, I mean, they have similar goals, they share similar values. So I guess it's in their common interest to work together, or at least just shelter them.
And especially they had this pressure of showing the international community that they're not failures, that this can happen. Everyone was watching. So it was also in everyone's interest that they have some sort of common ground and that they show that they can run a country. But I was talking to someone because in our previous discussion, you said that, before when the US was here, the institutions were non-existent, basically, that ironically, the president who, wrote a book about institutions didn't build any.
Yes.
And then that people, were struggling for food, but that now that the Taliban took over, you have some people that that you speak to that say, you know what, now at least we're not asking for food on the streets.
So the economic situation is pretty much the same.
Okay.
But the people from Afghanistan, and I have a lot of friends from there, I mean, they do mention this one thing that relatively now it's a bit more peaceful. Because before the Taliban took power, they were in constant fights and constant war. At least that's not happening now.
Right.
So yeah, I mean the economic situation is pretty much the same, but at least it's a bit more peaceful.
Wow. It's just, I don't know, so upsetting to hear the situation. It kind of almost feels like there's no hope. It kind of seems this is just the way of life, or it's going to be the way of life for quite a prolonged period of time. Is there any way, or do you have any ideas, or are there any resistant movements to the Taliban, or to try and de-radicalize the Taliban, or just unifying the Islamic world? Because all this extremism from just minute differences, and if you read the Quran and follow Prophet Muhammad's word, I'm sure it's obscene to take this angle.
So again, this extremism has been inflicted in the Taliban or even the Pashtuns for like more than 4 decades now, more than 40 years. It cannot be fixed overnight, and it can be fixed, but it cannot be fixed overnight. Consistent capacity building initiatives where we sort of promote tolerance and peace and sort of just a sense of social cohesion among the society. Yes, that can be the way out. I mean, that's what I see the way out is, but it's gonna take decades.
Decades.
Are you? Do you believe in the West's influence in Pakistani politics? A lot of Pakistani people I speak to are always saying the West have such a heavy hand in politics there. And do you think Imran Khan again was an example of this? They fund a lot, they have quite a lot of soft control, and that is what's keeping, this unity and the expansion of the Taliban, it seems.
So we have to accept that Pakistan is a periphery of the West. And they always do have a say in the way the country is being run. It's not like they're running the country exactly how they want it to be, but they do definitely have a strong say. Uh, I wouldn't say if Imran Khan being in jail is their decision, or him not like getting out of jail is their decision exactly. But again, they do have a pretty strong say in how the country is being run.
Is he still in jail now?
Yeah, he's still in jail. And funny enough, I just came across a news article today that he's about to run for the Chancellor of Oxford University from jail.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
He graduated from Oxford, yeah.
Yeah, because he was a cricket player back in the day, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And yeah, he's quite a revered character here. And it's just crazy how his life has sort of ended up. But that's what I was so confused, because I knew him as this anti-Western, leader, and then he's in jail. So I thought that was a consequence of that. But no, you said he's actually gone the other way.
Yeah. He was supporting Taliban. I mean, he was pretty much okay with that. And
don't Pakistani people feel betrayed by him?
so propaganda works really good.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
His party won the election.
Well, they didn't win it. I mean, to be like speaking like from a very neutral perspective, they definitely got more votes, but they didn't win the election. And again, as I said, propaganda works pretty good there. So there was a lot of propaganda from army to basically in favor of Imran Khan before like these elections, the previous elections. And it was so strong that it just stuck, and it's still there in people, and they still think like, he's going to save our country.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it's very strong with Pakistani people. They always, they see him as the answer, the solution.
Yeah.
But I mean, where isn't?
I mean, he was in power for 4 years. I mean, what happened? Nothing. We were only at a worse position than we were.
So why was he in jail? What was the reason?
So to be honest, like even the cases on him, like it doesn't really make any sense. One of them was pretty bad actually. So he remarried someone, and so according to Pakistan's law and even like Islamic values, if you divorce someone, you're not supposed to remarry for a period of, I think, I'm not sure exactly, I think it's 4 months. And he basically remarried his wife before that period could end. And someone just filed a case against him, and he was in prison.
Wow.
I mean, it doesn't really make any sense, like, And then there was also a few other corruption charges, stuff like that, considering that his biggest election campaign was for like anti-corruption and stuff like that. Then he was in jail for corruption, selling basically state gifts, a few watches and stuff like that.
I mean, when you look at history, that's the go-to move of the establishment. When someone wants to be gone, they're like, hey, you stole from the treasury, you did something, in jail, But yeah, Imran Khan is definitely, but I'm surprised because I don't know why I heard that his party won the election.
They got more votes. They got a lot of votes. But then, I mean, democracy is it's more like a facade in Pakistan. It doesn't really matter who you vote for. It's pretty easy to like change the amount of.
So who ended up winning?
Right now there's a coalition government between PMLN and People's Party (PPP), and then PTI is in opposition, Imran Khan's party.
And you mentioned this thing that Imran Khan supported the Taliban, and you were saying that he would negotiate with them. But like, in what way was he supporting the Taliban? Because to get a nickname like you mentioned, he had to be doing something.
Sorry, what was the nickname again?
Was it Taliban Khan or something?
Yeah. Again, I do somewhat agree to his stance on negotiating because, I mean, the way I see it, war is not the solution. But then legitimizing an organization which has only done bad, I mean, that's also not the way to go. It's very much in the gray area regarding how, like, even if let's say tomorrow, the Taliban say, okay, we give up, hands up. What do we do then? Like, can you integrate them into the society perfectly? No, because they've
Why
been
not?
through a process of, like, being in war and being violent all of these years since literally day one they were born. You cannot just let them into the society like that. So
So they're kind of stuck.
yeah, and we're kind of stuck, and everyone's kind of stuck,
So everyone in Pakistan is.
especially as Pashtuns. Especially as Pashtuns. I would say that Punjab, on the other hand, it's way more relatively stable. And they don't have this issue.
Where is the North? What is it called? North Waziristan?
North Waziristan.
Because that was the home of the TPT,
Yes,
or no, or the original
TTP.
Taliban.
Yeah,
as well.
TTP. Waziristan, both North and South Taliban they still have a lot of hold over there. Basically, most of the Taliban leaders were also from there. So that's one other reason. And funnily enough, most of the areas in North Waziristan are no-go areas where even the civilians now can't go there. No matter even if you're from the same village, like if you have land there, like, sometimes you'll be stopped. And coincidentality, I don't even know if this is a coincidence or not, but there are a lot of copper and gold mines in Waziristan too. And we're literally just extracting them and just having, like, it's not safe for you to go there. So don't come here. I'm just going to get all of this copper and gold out. And then once it's out, like, it's safe now, so you can go back.
There's always conflict where there's resources. All over the world, you just find the most conflict-ridden regions. They just tend to have all these precious minerals, It's quite a sad case. So say the name again, North
Waziristan.
That's even worse than where you grew up.
So I was just going through some statistics today, and my city was like on the second number of, like, statistically, the most terrorist incidents happened in Waziristan and then Peshawar. So I was not first there.
But yeah, okay. I mean, it's just such a shame that these regions are so, there's no social unity, complete almost anarchy is how it seems to me. And I just wonder, how is Pakistan coping? Because the news I hear is just, honestly, it's quite dismal. I mean, economics is bad, lots of debt default, so many crop failures, 50-degree summers which are unbearable. How does floods?
Illicit money. It's all in the grey. It's literally all in the grey. It's smuggling, and again, since, like, if someone is extracting copper and gold on the excuse that it's not safe for you to go there, of course it's not being documented. And it's not like this is not the only gold or copper mine that's not being documented. There are so many gas and oil reserves. So resources definitely do exist, but they're all in the grey. And that's how Pakistan survived. That's how Pakistan survived the financial crisis of 2008. It had little to no impact on Pakistan because most of our economy was in the grey.
So it wasn't connected.
I think a lot of developing nations actually didn't really actually suffer that much because of the financial crisis. They're quite undeveloped economies and they're not very financialized and there weren't very many links. But okay, when all this goes on, what are the feelings of the people, and aren't there any ideas for, like, revolution or
So last week, as I mentioned at the start of this podcast, there was a large protest in Banu district. I mean, people in literally hundreds of thousands came out waving white flags for peace. And
is this Pashtuns or is this everyone?
Pashtuns. Because we are the one who are being affected on the forefronts. And literally hundreds of thousands of people out on the roads bearing white flags, literally peace written on those flags. So what happened was that Pakistan army, they literally opened fire on them.
Wow.
3 people were killed and dozens were injured. I think more than 3 would be killed, but that's the only source that I could get. Since last week to this day, there's been a sit-in going on in Banu, in that district, Banu district, and almost all of the city, it's closed down. There's no internet service there. There's almost no electricity over there. And it has got almost little to no media coverage. People are definitely frustrated. They're very... Yeah.
What role does the media have to play in Pakistan?
So again, it's very much regulated by the army and ISI. They cannot publish anything that they don't like. So, I mean, they're somewhat on their payroll, or even if they're not on their payroll, they're being intimidated by them, and they cannot post anything that they don't want out to go in the media.
What about on social media?
So again, the internet. So what they do then is they shut down internet services in all of that region. Yeah, and internet services in Bannu has been off since like a week now.
Yeah, they do that sometimes. Like they'll even like shut down social media.
Yeah. Twitter is banned in Pakistan for like a year now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
What led to that? Was there an instance that kind of...
It's not one instance, but like
Elon
many.
Musk took
Yeah.
over, that's the instance.
Was that the instance?
Yeah. But like, yeah, many instances. Like they know if Twitter has a lot of reach, or should I say X now. But that's how they sort of try to control. But of course, it doesn't get controlled that way. I mean, the world doesn't work that way. The truth always gets out sooner or later.
Yep. So it was a culmination of events over time, and they just said, no more Twitter.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree. You can't really suppress... I mean, you can do... There's some examples today of nations which, you know, a lot of their resources and efforts are just oriented around, you know, suppressing the truth. But I agree with you. North Korea.
Yeah, I wanted to ask... Sorry, bro.
No, you go.
I wanted to ask your brother... So you mentioned you worked in the UN.
Yeah.
But you also told me he worked in North Korea at one point, which is this... We're talking about, you know, how suppressed Pakistan is, but North Korea is a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
Wow. So your brother worked in North
He
Korea?
lived in North Korea for like a year.
Wow.
Yeah, in Pyongyang.
Sorry, your brother's life, she's lived a crazy life. Wow.
Bomb blast, then goes to
North Korea, I've never...
And he was in North Korea when like they were going through like the peak of those missiles testing. So he was in North Korea at that time.
Wow, your brother's lived a life, man. Wow.
What does he say about that time?
So, I mean, of course it was stressful, but he also said that he felt incredibly safe there. And the reason he said that is because literally everyone is being monitored. So if everyone is being monitored, there's no chance that like, you know, something can happen to you.
Everyone's fearing for their lives. So
Exactly, yeah. So why would someone do something to you then?
And then he's also under an international structure,
Yeah,
such as the UN.
Yeah.
And so what was he doing there? What was his job?
So he was I think he was in budgeting, budgeting and programming. So North Korea has a huge malnourishment problem. They don't have enough food to feed their people. And of course, they've been sanctioned, so they can't trade. So WFP is the only UN organization that's allowed to work in North Korea. And they were working on to like just basically bridge the gap in malnourishment, especially for children. That's what he was doing there.
Wow.
Does he say anything about his experience, what he saw, how Pyongyang was?
So it was really cold there because the temperatures could drop to like -30. And apart from that, I mean, he didn't interact with the locals much. I guess the locals weren't even allowed to interact with him much because, again, everyone is under surveillance. But he did mention something that if the father from a family, he speaks against the supreme leader, or like even if their son or their daughter feel like, you know, he's thinking of speaking against him, their own sons or daughters or wives, they will report him.
Damn.
Yeah, because for them, their supreme leader is greater than anything else.
So truly, do the people see the leader as this?
Since, like, I mean, if you're born and since day one, you're fed this idea, like, you know, he's your God. All right. And you've been fed that repeatedly over and over again every day. At one point, you'll just accept it.
Because I've heard, you know, you hear stories about North Korea and you're not entirely sure if they're all true. And I remember a friend telling me everyone has pictures of him in their house.
Yeah. That's true. Everyone does need to have pictures of him in the house. Yeah.
Because there's no religion there.
Their religion is their supreme leader. That's their God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They literally worship him. Yeah.
But that's so crazy. You said if the kid or family thinks that the father is thinking.
Yeah. It's that bad.
Like, that's so crazy. Like, damn, God.
Oh my, North Korea, honestly, wow. Just, yeah.
And so just 1 year and he was out.
Yeah, then he was out.
He was just a 1 year contract.
Yeah.
How did that make him feel about going back to Pakistan afterwards? Did he sort of appreciate life a bit more? I don't know.
I guess a bit. But like, he mentioned that, like, it's the people are not like violent or anything. Like, even regardless of this whole authoritarian approach, they're not violent, at least. And if you compare that with us Pashtuns, I mean,
Okay, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah, because there's not violence there, but there's, extreme suffering.
Yeah.
But what you see in Pakistan is
It's
just
both
pure
suffering
violence.
and, well, of course, suffering too.
Yeah.
But yeah. So at least I guess we're still worse than North Korea.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so now that the Taliban is resurging in Pakistan, have they, is it ongoing now, or is the bomb blast going back? And
It's
what's your family
ongoing.
saying about this back home?
So it's ongoing, but again, it'll take some time for us to analyze exactly what the trend is. For now, it's bad, and if the US releases this $100 million fund, I can only imagine it'll get worse because they'll need to justify this fund to fight, and that's only when it gets bad.
So can you tell me again why? Like, what was the event that started this, again?
So there wasn't a specific event. There wasn't a specific event. I guess if there was one event that started it, it was the USSR reaching into like South Asia. And that's what basically kickstarted all of that. And since following that, it was more like natural progression. Yeah.
So this recent activity that we're seeing now is not that we saw a drought and now it's happening again. It's just been constant.
Yeah, it's been constant. And I guess the ISI needed money. And that's why they kind of staged these bomb blasts and target killings. Now they're justifying, this is going on. We need to fight them. We need to start a military operation. We need dollars to fund that military operation. And that's how it goes on.
And so if the Pashtuns are the main victims and they know that, are they, organizing themselves to defend themselves?
For this time, it is being changed. In this current wave, they are definitely organizing. They're not defending themselves, but what they're doing is adopting a more non-violent approach and just asking for peace, coming out in literally hundreds of thousands, holding white peace banners, and just advocating for peace. And I think that's the right way to go about it. Because no matter how much we fight, there will always be bloodshed, and it'll keep continuing. The only way to stop is by adopting a non-violent approach.
Do you think a non-violent approach has a chance of working?
So it's not the first time. When we still had the British colonizers, there was a Pashtun nationalist leader, Bacha Khan, who was also one of the first few Pashtun nationalist leaders. And he lived his life on the principle of non-violence. Even when he staged a protest and the British opened fire on them, killing literally in the hundreds, he still stuck to his values of non-violence. Now, some people can argue that, that didn't work. We're still at a very bad position. Or we're still in a really bad place. But then we have to focus, or at least we have to try to understand what the larger picture was. Again, it's a process of decades and sometimes even centuries that you have to stick by this non-violent values and morals. And then, yeah, maybe things would be pretty bad for you. Maybe they'd be worse for your children, but for your grandchildren, maybe at that time people actually start to realize that violence is not the solution.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's all about the future. It's all about having hope and thinking about these approaches. But the youth in Pakistan, is there a general trend to which way they're inclined? You know, are they leaning towards the Taliban? Are they?
No, I don't think so. They're leading towards the Taliban. I mean, anyone in their sane mind wouldn't be attracted towards the Taliban. I guess the people who would be attracted towards them would have serious mental issues that needs to be like worked on. But apart from that, no one is being attracted to them. Of course, everyone wants peace at this point. So I guess that's the general trend. But then again, money sometimes weighs more than what the general trend is.
I think a lot of the time,
Yeah,
money
a
does.
lot of the times. And if dollars are coming in for you to fund fighting, that's what's going to happen.
So then there's no bottom-up approaches, or you know, people aren't organizing amongst each other.
So the current organization or the current mobilization of Pashtuns right now under the banner of PTM, Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, I would say this is the only bottoms-up approach or only popular bottoms-up approach that's been going on. But again, we're yet to see how it unfolds.
What do you think their chances are?
If they stick to non-violent values and if they don't give up, they have all the chances.
If they don't give up, they will succeed.
Yeah. But then again, I cannot decide how long it would take.
When you say non-violent acts, what does that look like?
So let me just explain you what happened like last week. Literally, people in the hundreds of thousands came out holding white banners and advocating just for peace, and just walking around the city or parading. And
Which city?
Banu, the same district, and just basically sending a message to the army or ISI that we want peace, we don't want any more wars. Such parades or such protests should follow from other provinces as well, so that there is a sort of, as you mentioned yourself earlier, some idea of unity and social cohesion among all of the Pashtuns, regardless of their cities or districts. So then, yeah, if this keeps going on, they have pretty strong chances.
Okay. And it'd be great to see these movements grow and, incorporate more people, and hopefully they can, overcome how fragmented Pakistani society is, and you can all unite and fight this common evil.
But so they're protesting, you said, against the army, but it seems that the problem is with the Taliban. Why are they aiming their protest towards the army?
Because they know, and everyone knows now, that unless and until the army wants like the Taliban to be there, they'll be there. And at the back foot, I mean, it's the army and the ISI that's playing the game. Taliban, as I mentioned earlier, they're more like a tool. So, and almost everyone has realized this by now. So that's why they're directly going towards the army, we don't want this, rather than protesting against Taliban.
What about India? Do you think, the conflict you guys have with India, and I guess you need to keep up military with India's, vast military. Do you think that has a role to play in it? Of course, also kind of empowers the military in Pakistan and, the Taliban, and also has this kind of knock-on effect.
So that's the excuse the Pakistani establishment has been using to augment or grow their army, and all of the budget that goes to Pakistan's army. That's the excuse they're using. Oh, India is way bigger. They have a way bigger army. They can crush us. We need to defend ourselves. We need money to basically have technology and all of the other equipment that we need to fight India. But in reality, it's nothing like that. I mean, we have bigger threats, internal threats. That's going to eat up Pakistan even sooner than India would. And we need to set our priorities straight. That's what I think.
What do Indians generally say about, the Taliban? What does Modi say about Pakistan and the Taliban?
So as far as I can understand, India experienced a very large economic boom over the past 10 years. And it's come to a point where they're focusing more on themselves now as us. Even general people of Pakistan or the general youth, they have accepted that, we cannot compete with India now. And there's no point in competing with India. What the Pakistani establishment did was they were spending on their army and thinking if we just keep spending on our army, we can defend ourselves. What India, on the other hand, did was they spent on their economy, their industries, their people, and they won the long game.
So you think this conflict with India is becoming obsolete?
It's becoming obsolete because we're slowly accepting that we lost. We lost the conflict.
And now you've got a bigger threat on the
Now we've got
horizon.
bigger internal threats that we got to deal with.
But that conflict is then still being used by the army
Yes.
to push certain narratives.
Yes.
And do you think that conflict is used also to keep Taliban and terrorist activity going?
So, as Tara mentioned earlier in the start, that was one of the reasons to create the TTP to secure the western border. And yeah, that's what they did back then. But now they realize that, we can't even control this. And this is also getting out of our hand. So, yeah, to answer your question, that's what they did to secure the western border.
Do you feel like, we mentioned that the army, feels like they're supporting this. Is there a part of the army that feels like they're losing control of the Taliban? And if the Taliban gains too much power, how do you think the army would respond?
So again, it's not like they have complete authority over Taliban. It's not like the army has complete authority over Taliban. But it's not like they don't have authority over Taliban either. It's in the gray. They do definitely realize that the threat of that does exist, where they go completely rogue and literally just come over and start a full-scale war. That is why they're using that sort of as an excuse to start this new military operation, to sort of gain back control and gain back authority. Yeah.
And also get money from the U.S.
Exactly. That's the primary motive. All of the other motives are then secondary or tertiary.
But the U.S. is not stupid. We're having this discussion, and you say many people are realizing that, the motives of the Pakistani army. The U.S. is probably aware of that.
Yes.
What possibly could be their interests?
Good. The US is not stupid by funding billions to Ukraine either, or funding billions to Israel. What I personally think is that both the Republicans and the Democrats, they have their own lobbies. And if it's Biden or or any other basically parties that have lobbies with the ammunition companies, for example, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, it's always in their interest to have war or fund war. Because at the end of the day, it's their companies that basically build new clients. So if we see it that way, it's always in their interest to fund war.
So in that way, it's sort of an investment.
Exactly. Investment in their own companies or in their companies of their lobbyists.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, it's just hard to counteract this machine, the military-industrial complex is, how do you defeat that? So because that is so, rampant and it's this thriving industry with so much, so many resources and money behind it, you think there's sort of no hope for Pakistan defeating this, essentially?
Again, the only hope is struggle, and struggle keeping non-violent values and morals at the top. We have to think of it like having that level of peace or that stability. It's not a destination, but it's more like a journey. And we all have to play our part in getting or in just passing through this journey. It's very easy to lose hope.
What does playing your part look like? What does it look like in your everyday life? How would you contribute to?
So right now I'm here. I'm talking about what's happening in over there, and I'm talking about like just raising awareness, and just like doing the bare minimum, to be very honest, and just like having that in mind that I have to contribute to basically have peace in our region. So I guess the best approach for it would be to engage in active political movements, to be a political activist. If you can't do that, just write. If you can't even write, just speak. So again, there are different levels of engagement for people of different capacities or people in like different stages of life.
Yeah, and also people in different places in the world.
Yeah, different places in the world.
So people in Pakistan can go protest, but what can the people that are, in periphery countries in the international world do? And definitely speak and raise awareness. People that, have an education to speak about this.
Exactly.
Can definitely help.
And
especially they're the ones who live in a country or countries that have more free speech, that are able to speak about it.
Exactly. And that's honestly why I'm very even privileged and honored to be here. Honestly, you giving me this platform to speak all about this, it's
such a pleasure to be able to speak.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
It's good. It's the new wave. It's the new wave. Independent media.
Yes.
Even in Pakistan, it's happening a little bit. Independent media.
Yeah. But then again, it's very easy to get a threat there. No one's gonna call you. Why did you air this show? Why did you talk about Taliban? But over there, if you do that, you'll get that.
Yeah, there's a strong suppressing.
It's very authoritative.
Yeah,
very almost. It's more like a totalitarian government, not even an authoritative government.
I know, especially compared to Western nations. Freedom of speech is such a privilege. We don't really. I think here we don't really appreciate. And I think, do you feel the Pakistani diaspora, they have this sense of responsibility to, spread the message, raise awareness? Because to be honest, you don't really hear much about this resurgence in the Taliban, and people don't really understand, and what we know might be quite far from the truth. So I'm sure the diaspora feels they have a strong sense of duty to spread the message. And
yes, there does exist. There certainly does exist like a sense of this duty to spread awareness, but I think that needs to be a bit more augmented and upped up and a bit more organized and collaborated. There needs to be a bit more cohesion in this whole struggle of raising awareness.
Yeah. I guess maybe you could be the one to start it, ramp it up.
Maybe this is the start.
This is the start.
But it's good. But all right, maybe we can end it here.
Yes.
And Sawal, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Absolute privilege to be able to speak.
It's an
and it's always
honor
good
to be here.
to get a perspective that's different. To see it, someone that saw it firsthand, and someone that cares also.
And that's the beauty of independent media. It's unfiltered. There's no agenda. Just an honest, open conversation.
Yes.
Sawal, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Maybe next time again.
Yeah.
Who knows? All right.
Cool. Let's end it
Take
here.
care.